Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. So it's been a little while. I made the decision at the end of December, just after I got back to college after Christmas, that I was going to take a bit of a break from filming just because last term was really busy and I just felt like I hadn't really stopped and I was pushing myself a bit too hard probably. I was still enjoying filming and making videos, but it was becoming more stressful than enjoyable, and this is meant to be like a fun hobby. I decided that I was going to take January off from filming, and that was a really super good decision because very sadly we lost my nan to COVID in January, and so emotionally I was a little bit all over the place, and so I was glad that I'd already taken that decision to have a break from filming. So yeah, that's the brief life update. I'm now back. We're partway through February. I've been back staying with my parents again for the last couple of weeks, but I'm now back at college again. I had to go back for my nan's funeral. So we're gonna go into my December wrap up, and I just wanted to give that bit of background, and this is why it's taken me so long to do this video, because of all the stuff that's been happening and having a break and whatever. I'm going to go through my stats, and then I'm very quickly going to run down the rest of the books that I read in December, because a few of them were mentioned in the final recent reads video that I posted last year, and I'll link to that. The first 3 books I read in December were in that video, and then I'm just going to quickly go through the other books that I read very quickly because A, it's now been over a month since I read them and I don't necessarily remember a lot about them, and B, because I don't want this to be a massively long video. Yeah, so we're going to start with the stats. So I read a total of 13 books in December. That was from 13 different authors. There were quite a few books that I was reading for uni. There were quite a few that I mentioned in the currently reading list that were books that were ongoing that I've been reading for a while. So it was really good to get through that many books. My total page count was 3,225 pages, and that gave me an average book length of 248 pages per book. As I always say, I didn't necessarily read all of those pages within the month. That's just the length of the books that I was reading. All of the books were under 500 pages, so I earned £1 per book for each of those books, and I didn't buy any books in December at all. So I finished the year with £18.68 in my book budget. I have bought some books in January, yeah, and a few in February, but I will talk about them when I get onto those wrap-ups later. The longest book that I read was Seven Devils by Laura Lamb and Elizabeth May, and the shortest book that I read was one I had to read for uni, which was called Telling Terror in Judges 19, which was written by one of my lecturers, Helen Painter. So the book that was published first out of all of these was Wuthering Heights, which was published in 1847, and that was a reread for me. And then there were 4 of the books I read were published in 2020. So that's actually quite a lot of new releases, but that's pretty good because one of them I borrowed, but the other 3 I bought, so it's always quite good to get through the ones that I'm buying. I gave 4 books 3 stars, 8 books 4 stars, and 1 book 5 stars. The only book I gave 5 stars to was actually Telling Terror in Judges 19. That lecturer is really good and I really enjoyed that book. It was quite a deep book, it covered some quite difficult subjects, but one that was ultimately really enjoyable to me. I can't remember if I mentioned, but in my various trips home I have taken a lot of these books with me. If they were ones that I had out from the college library, I took them back at the start of the year just before we went into another lockdown and the college library was shut to us. So a lot of the books I've kept I've taken home, and that's why most of these books I don't actually have a copy to hand to hold up to show you. So I'll be putting pictures in. But the one book that I do have was the book that I read the quickest, which was The Power of Women by June Sarpong. I'm going to be unhauling this. It was good for what it was, but it's a basic introduction to feminism and I'm a bit past that in my reading. I've just heard that there's a little free library near where I live now, so I'm going to take that and a couple of other books down to that later this week. But that was, yeah, I read that basically in one sitting. It's very short, very small. The book that took me the longest to read was called Portrait of the Kings by Alison. This was one I was kind of reading for college. Kind of, I say, because I actually started it in March before I knew for definite that I was coming here to study, but it is linked to the topic that I'm hoping to do a PhD in, so someone had lent it to me because they thought I'd find it interesting, and it was interesting, it just took a flipping long time to get through. So that took me 278 days. So my average reading length, there were a number of other books I read really quickly, so my average reading length was 50 days. There were quite a few books Actually, most of the books, I'd say, at least half of them were ones that I started straight away when I got them. Just over half of them were ones that I started straight away, so they weren't on my TBR for very long at all. The one that had been on my TBR the longest was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, and that had been on my TBR for 1199 days. And that is not even one of the books that has been on my TBR the longest. So that gave me an average length on my TBR of 180 days, because as I said, I was reading a lot of books pretty soon after I got them. Most of these books were on that list that I put together at the end of November of books that were on my currently reading shelf. There were a couple that I mentioned in that video, as well as ones that I wasn't currently reading but wanted or knew I would be reading within December. So there were only 3 that were not mentioned on that list, and 2 of those were books for uni, and the other one was this one, which was I just was trying to read one more book before the end of the year, and this was really short. 1 book was a reread, 4 books I borrowed from the library, 1 book I borrowed from a friend, 2 books were from my own TBR, and the other 5 were new ones that I bought within the last year, as in 2020. I'm going to film my 2020 stat wrap up and my 2021 goals also today, and I'm going to talk a bit more about how I completely failed to read books from my TBR that I already owned. Never mind. Okay, so 1 book was an audio book, 5 books were hardbacks, and the rest were paperbacks. I read a range of genres. Majority actually were Christian non-fiction because they were books I was reading for uni. A couple of fantasies, contemporary, a classic, regular non-fiction, a book of poetry, and a mystery story, and 1 sci-fi as well. 1 was for children, but the rest were all for an adult audience. In terms of the author nationalities, about half and half British and American, slightly more British actually, and then there was 1 French author as well. In terms of the author ethnicities, again, mainly white British and white American. 1 book had a number of different authors from different ethnicities, I think, but I wasn't entirely sure. It was one of the ones I read for uni, and it was really difficult to find out the information about all of the authors. So I've assumed, because of the topic, that it wasn't necessarily all white British people, but I could have been wrong on that. There was 1 Indigenous American author and 1 Black British author, and also 1 white Western European. And all the books were written by cisgendered people, 3 by cis men, 9 by cis women, and 1 which was written by a husband and wife duo. In terms of my challenges, 6 of the books were from indie publishers, 2 books counted towards the Start on Your Shelfathon, none of the books were from the oldest on my TBR, 1 book counted for Read Around the World, and none completed series. For author diversity, this was really poor. This came down to, I think, finishing a lot that were on my currently reading list, and ones for uni, which tend to be by cis white men. So from what I could find out about the authors, 2 of the books were from authors of colour, but other than that I didn't hit any of my other diversity markers in December, which is a bit of a shame really. And then in terms of character diversity, this was a bit better. 1 of the books in particular was really attempting to have a lot of diverse characters, so I did hit every marker for that. So that's marginalised ethnicity, LGBTQIA+, disability, mental health, and neurodiverse. For most of those, actually there were several books that hit those markers, so that was pretty good. That is the stats, I think. Editing Kerry is not going to enjoy this because I've got to stick in all the chart pictures and stick in all the book pictures. So back to the books. These are all books that I read in the second half of December because I filmed that Recent Reads video at the midpoint in December. I'm not going to talk a lot about them because, as I say, I don't remember a lot of them. Quite a few are for uni, so I'm just going to rush through them really, and if I can remember I'll give you brief thoughts. The first one I'm going to talk about today was The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I was buddy reading this with some booktube friends. It was a buddy read organised by Amber from Books of Amber. We had a really great discussion about it because there are a lot of themes within the book. One of the central themes of the book is the contrast between kind of organised religion and folk religion and the interaction of that. I was reading it obviously from a Christian perspective, and one of the ladies in the group chat is pagan, and so it was really interesting to hear her perspective on it and how religion is represented in it. And it was actually a really, what could have been quite a fraught discussion was actually a really pleasant one, because we're both very well, and everyone in the discussion was really open to hearing everyone's perspective. But I found it really touching that, considering how different our backgrounds were and how people of faith are often represented as being really anti every other faith, and it was just really lovely to be able to talk openly about religion and what it means to us, and how, particularly when the context of the book is that it's not portraying organised religion in a particularly positive light, but we could still see how some of the characters of faith in the book were a better representation than maybe the more organised religion characters. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but it was a really enjoyable buddy read and I really enjoyed the book. I've bought the second one, bought that in January, so I'm looking forward to carrying on that series soon. The next book that I finished was called I See a New City by Gerard Kelly. This was a collection of poetry. Gerard Kelly is actually someone I know. He and his wife run a charity that I used to be really involved with, and this was a new collection of poetry that he released last year, so I always jump at the chance to read anything new he's written. He mainly writes Christian non-fiction, kind of more devotional books, but also has written a couple of collections of poetry and one novel, and I've really enjoyed everything he's written. So I gave that one 4 stars. I didn't say I gave The Bear and Nightingale 4 stars as well. Next I read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. This is the next book I had to read in the Pairault series. I also gave this one 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. It had been spoiled for me. I knew before I started who the murderer was, but actually that didn't really tamper my enjoyment because I could then see how it all fitted together more clearly, and even though I knew, I was kind of like, but what if that person was wrong with what they told me? So I thought it was really cleverly put together. Then I finished a couple of books I was reading for uni. So one was called Method in Ministry and one was called Liberation Theology UK. I'm not really going to talk very much about them. They both were written in the 90s and felt a little bit dated. I was reading them for essays, and the less said about that the better, really. I then finished a book called Wounded Prophet by Michael Ford, which was a biography of Henri Nouwen, who is a theologian that I really admire his work. He was a Catholic priest and wrote a lot about love, unconditional love of God for people. He struggled through most of his life with his sexuality because he was a gay man and a Catholic. So it was really interesting to see his journey set out. And I've only read a couple of his books, but I'm looking forward to reading some more of his own books and to see his perspective on things. He'd written so many books and I just found a lot of his story really relatable, so that was quite cool. I then read Seven Devils by Laura Lamb and Elizabeth May. This was our Space Sirens book club pick for December. I mean, I gave it 4 stars in the end. I didn't love it. I enjoyed most of the book, actually, to be fair. It was just the ending I found really disappointing. I'm not going to go into much more detail about it, but I will link our book club discussion about this in the description box for you, so you can go and check out if you want to know all of my thoughts, all of what I disliked about it, particularly about the ending, then go and check that out. Yeah, so I'll link the Seven Devils live show so you can go and check that out. Then I finished Portrait of the Kings, which I've already talked about a little bit. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I ended up giving that 3 stars, which was maybe a little bit harsh, but it was just really dense and really difficult to get through. It took me a really long time. Then I read a book called Domino, Journaliste, which was by Suzanne Pairault. This was a French book aimed at children. It's about a young man called Domino who wants to be a journalist, and it was actually really fun and really sweet. I really enjoyed it, and a really good lesson about journalism ethics in there as well. So I gave that one 4 stars. That was one of my Read Around the World books, and I read it in French, and so it was one of the books I was trying to read a certain number of books in French last year. And then finally, as I've already mentioned, the last book I finished was Power of Women by Jean Sarpong, and this is non-fiction about feminism. Didn't take me very long to get through, quite a basic introduction, so hopefully this will go on to someone that is going to find it really helpful, but for me it was a little bit more basic than where I'm at, and so I ended up giving it 3 stars. So that was a whistle-stop tour of all my December reading, my stats, and a quick rundown of all the books that I hadn't already talked about. This actually didn't take me very long to get through. I was worried this was going to be a really long video, but I know I haven't talked very much about any of the things and maybe haven't dwelt on stuff as much as I usually would, but for my reintroduction to BookTube, this was probably about the right length. So I'm going to be doing a bit more filming today. You'll see some more videos from me coming soon, hopefully, and thank you for bearing with while I had my break. Look forward to hearing from you in the comments what you've been up to recently, what are some of your favourite books you've read, or if you can't think of anything you want to say, just drop an emoji. I don't know, maybe like a Christmas tree because I'm talking about December or something, just to let me know that you made it this far. You can also follow me on my social media. That information will all be in the description box for you. I've also taken a break from Instagram, but I'm going to try and get back into that today as well. But I'm also on Twitter and on Goodreads, and I've now joined Storygraph, but I'm not quite sure how to link that, so I will maybe have that linked as well if I remember. I will probably also link for all the books I mentioned today to the Book Trigger Warnings website if they are on there. Some of them probably won't be because they're books you're not likely to read. Some of the ones I've read for uni probably won't have that link, but most of the other ones will. So if you want to make sure that these books are safe for you, you can go and check that out, because I haven't talked about content warnings today because I've only very quickly gone through all of this. Please also like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I think that's everything. Can you tell I'm a bit rusty? So I'm gonna stop it there. I'm gonna say thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!